Hello everyone, it's me, your average bonehead, Jay, and welcome back to Character Skeleton. In this series, I give an analysis to any given character from any show, movie, or video game, as well as their overall journey, starting with an introduction of the character, their relationships with other characters, all of their major character development moments from beginning to end, and then I close it out with my final thoughts and what I feel the character represents. Now, since I'm in a Thomas kick, I'm always in a Thomas kick, I want to talk about, in my opinion, one of the show's most underrated characters. And would you believe me if I said one of the show's most underrated characters is a character who's been at the forefront of the franchise for over 20 years? That's right, I want to talk about the main girl at Tidmouth Sheds, Emily the Stirling Engine.
It's Emily, ma'am.
Who is Emily the Stirling Engine? Emily is the number 12 engine on the island of Sodor's main railway, the Northwestern Railway, and her basis is a GNR 422 single Stirling, which is my personal favorite engine basis. What a beauty. She was introduced in Season 7 as a recurring side character, but from Season 8 onward, she was made a main character, and right at the beginning of Season 9, a new berth was added to Tidmouth Sheds so she can stay there with Thomas, Edward, Henry, Gordon, James, and Percy. And she has remained a prominent character of the series ever since. Emily can be described as having a mother-like persona towards the other engines, though I would personally view it as more of a big sister type role, as she can be shown to be worried about other engines' well-beings and want to help them, though sometimes her help can come from her self-aggrandizing herself, which leads to her coming off as rather bossy, which will then lead to other engines not listening to her until disaster strikes. However, despite this rather pompous attitude she has about herself, Emily is also known to be rather self-doubting, as she'll sometimes look at other engines and be jealous of how special they are when compared to her, or at least how she views herself when compared to them. However, when the time comes, Emily is willing to step up and show that she does sometimes actually know best, and can be seen as a great leader. And after 17 seasons of proving herself, she is finally given her number 12.
Emily loves her coaches and being part of the Fat Controllers Railway.
But how did we get here? Well, first, let's take a look at her relationships. Despite being a main character, Emily's relationships and dynamics with other characters is all over the place. Starting off with the most consistent, at least in the classic and hit era, would obviously be Thomas. Emily and Thomas's whole relationship is basically the big sister little brother type dynamic. And in the classic series we see this in episodes like Salty Stormy Tale or What's the Matter with Henry, where Emily scolds Thomas and Percy for making fun of Salty and Henry. But this whole brother-sister dynamic really kicks off in the hit era, most notably in the episode Thomas, Emily, and the Snowplow, where Thomas, of course, doesn't want to wear his snowplow, and Emily is the one who has to tell him to do so. However, she does it in a bossy and commanding way, which causes Thomas to end up not wanting to listen to her, which causes disaster to strike. I actually like this episode because both Thomas and Emily are flawed here. Yes, Thomas should have listened to Emily, but at the same time, Emily shouldn't have come off as so controlling to him, which makes sense for a lesson to teach in these types of dynamics. This sibling dynamic between the two is explored even more in the episode Halloween, where Thomas and Emily have to go to the scrapyard and are both trying to convince each other that ghosts aren't real, until they both see what they think is a ghost and end up rushing back to the sheds as fast as possible. But when everything is clear, the two end up feeling more comfortable going to the scrapyards, at least together. As for her dynamic with Percy, it's more of the big sister and more naive little brother who just blindly listens to whatever his older sibling tells him. This is mostly shown in Emily Knows Best, where Emily and Percy play the game where Emily's the queen and Percy will listen to her. And Percy just blindly listens to Emily's instructions, which of course causes confusion and delay. Though both these dynamics seem to be kinda lost once CGI begins, but we'll get to that later. As for her main dynamic in the classic era, that would be with Henry. We only get one episode where classic Emily and classic Henry interact, and that's What's the Matter with Henry, where Emily is the only one to feel sympathy for Henry when he ends up being sick again, and ultimately is the one to help him. Moving on to her dynamics in the hit era, the most obvious ones would be Gordon and James. In the episode As Good as Gordon, we see that Emily does in fact look up to him, as she wants to be, as the episode would imply, as good as Gordon. Though I think her dynamic with James is more interesting, as while they don't really share a major episode together, we see that these two get along, like in the episode Spick and Span, and we see in the episode Emily's New Route, James warning Emily about the Blacklock run. And one thing I want to mention about Emily's dynamic with these two is since Henry kind of became nicer during the hit era, Emily kind of filled in his spot as the third snooty big engine who is constantly belittling the smaller ones and always bragging about how good she is. And I kind of like this dynamic, though they didn't really do much with it, and this dynamic is all but gone when the CGI begins. But then moving on to Diesel, Emily only really shares one episode with Diesel, that being Emily and the Special Coaches, where she at first doesn't care about Diesel's achievements as she just wants to celebrate Gordon achieving his speed record and bringing him his new coaches. But then once Diesel acts out and takes said Special Coaches, Emily ends up chasing him down until Diesel's engine gives out, and then Emily ends up realizing why Diesel was acting the way he was and actually does care about his special achievement. And then we get to see more of her caring side as she ends up going to Sir Topham Hatt and telling him about Diesel's special achievement, and they end up rewarding him with a new engine. But overall, this dynamic doesn't really go anywhere. After that, her last model series dynamic that I want to bring up is her one with Whiff. In the episode Emily's Rubbish, she ends up having to work with Whiff when he's new to the island, and of course she is repulsed by him due to the fact that he's
a bit smelly.
And throughout the whole episode she's just trying to avoid him until she ends up realizing that he's not that bad of a guy after all. Look, it's one of the few times a hit era new character isn't in an episode that's just about Thomas, so you just take what you get. Though once again, this dynamic goes nowhere, as it's never brought up again, which is even stranger to me due to the fact that Whiff is like the only new character from this era to actually survive into the transition to CGI. In fact, Whiff is still around to this day. Like, he managed to last longer than Rosie. How the hell did that happen? Anyways, transitioning into CGI, Emily basically loses all of those dynamics and ends up gaining, I think, one with Mavis. I say one because they only have one episode together, and they're barely together in it. But in the episode A Blooming Mess, Emily assumes that Mavis isn't happy and ends up bringing flowers to her quarry in order to cheer her up. But it turns out that it was all just a big misunderstanding, and Mavis just wants everyone to be really useful, which ends up making her happy. And then this dynamic is never brought up again, but it's a Nitrogen era 3 Strikes formula episode. What more did you expect? And then there's Dash, the logging loco, and all their dynamic and only episode amounts to is him teaching Emily a fun way of whistling. And the logging locos suck, they're just such wasted potential. But moving on to the Brenner era, Emily ends up getting a new dynamic with one of the newer characters, Caitlin. And I actually kind of like this one. Emily ends up looking up to Caitlin, but at the same time she ends up helping Caitlin, which results in Caitlin looking up to Emily. It's kind of a mutual respect these two have for each other. I can buy their friendship pretty well. Though it doesn't really go anywhere. Are you seeing a pattern? The last major dynamic I can really go over is Nia and Rebecca. Though I honestly don't know if these three even have a dynamic. Despite the fact that Emily now has 2 more girls at Tidmouth to interact with, these three only had 1 episode together, and all of their interactions afterwards all just feel like they're just being nice to each other. Nothing's unique about any of their dynamics when compared to how they act with other characters. There's no spice here. There's nothing. They're all just friendly to each other, and that's it. Great characters there with Nia and Rebecca. You did it, Mattel. And other than that, that's basically every major character Emily really interacts with. In none of the eras does she have a strong dynamic with Edward or Toby, unless you count this scene.
I always know what to do, huffed Emily. Toby laughed.
Now, if that wasn't all over the place, let's take a look at her character development. Character development. Out of the main 12 engines, I don't think any character in this show was more inconsistent than Emily. Throughout all 5 eras of this show, Classic, Hit, Nitrogen, Brenner, and Blubba, each one had a different way of portraying Emily. Let's go in order. Starting off with the Classic series, Emily was only in the last season, Season 7. In her first episode, Emily's New Coaches, she ended up having a bad first impression to the island of Sodor, as everyone was ignoring her for taking Thomas's coaches, Annie and Clarabelle. But she ends up redeeming herself when she ends up saving Oliver and Thomas from a nasty collision, which is where she ends up gaining her friendship with Thomas. Throughout the rest of the season after that episode, she ends up making regular appearances as a major side character. In episodes like Salty Stormy Tale, and especially What's the Matter with Henry, she ends up scolding Thomas and Percy for making fun of Salty and Henry, and in the case of What's the Matter with Henry, she goes out of her way to help him. Other than that, the only other thing she really did in season 7 was in the episode Bulgy Rides Again, where she's the one who gives Bulgy the idea of becoming a vegetable bus, which he ends up liking. So yeah, Emily throughout season 7 is actually pretty nice in my eyes. I do like her kind and caring nature, but not afraid to tell off those who are acting like jerks. Though I will admit, it definitely ends up making her sometimes feel like just a female Edward. Luckily, I say that was changed for the better in my favorite portrayal of Emily, the Hit Era portrayal. Yes, you heard me right. Emily in the Hit Era, in my eyes, is actually a unique character. In this era, they really like to emphasize Emily's bossy side. As I explained earlier, in episodes like Thomas, Emily, and the Snowplow, or Emily Knows Best, Emily is shown bossing around Thomas and Percy, and claiming that she knows best. And again, while what she's doing does come from a place of genuine concern, at least in Thomas's case, this behavior of her ends up just causing more trouble, and she ends up having to learn to not be like that. Now, apparently, this personality change for Emily was inspired by Lucy from Peanuts. Yes, her.
I recognize your frailties, your weaknesses. You need me to point out your faults, Charlie Brown.
Why and how they were inspired to base Emily's new personality off of Lucy of all characters is beyond me, but oh well. The reason why this portrayal of Emily is my favorite is because it really does make her a unique character, because it ends up making her seem like a middle ground between Edward and Toby and Gordon and James. Let me explain. The Edward and Toby side comes from her wanting to help out the smaller and younger engines, showing more of a parental or older sibling type dynamic with them and trying to do her best to help them. However, the Gordon and James side comes from the fact that she can be rather pompous and egotistical while doing this, more self-serving than anything, which is what will usually leads to her downfall. I find this to be much more interesting than her just overall being more nice all the time. You can tell what she does still comes from a place of genuine care, but it's her own ego and tone that ends up causing these problems, which is why I think this is a good way to make her stand out from the rest of the main engines. Now, don't get me wrong, since this is the Hit Era, there's obviously times where this does in fact go too far. The episode Emily's Adventure is absolutely terrible. It is literally just her bossing everyone around and gets little to no repercussions for it. It becomes more of just a boring episode, and Emily just makes it so annoying with how she is. She shouldn't have to learn to say please and thank you. But on a positive side, it's not like this more bossier side of Emily is always what they defaulted to. Episodes like the already mentioned Halloween, or one of my favorite Emily episodes, Emily's New Route, really shows off the more vulnerable sides to Emily. As in Halloween, her and Thomas are scared of going to the scrapyard, and in Emily's New Route, she wants to get her job done as fast and efficiently as possible, so she doesn't end up getting assigned to the Blacklock run, due to James telling her about a supposed monster there. But then when Emily ends up messing up and has no choice but to be put onto the Blacklock run, she's at first very scared of the area, but when Emily learns to face her fears, she ends up realizing what the monster really was and ends up liking this run. Despite the episode's more childish writing, I actually really like this episode. And also in the Season 9 special, Calling All Engines, they end up building a 7th berth at Tidmouth Sheds for Emily to permanently stay there with the other engines. That's literally the only thing of note Calling All Engines did aside from retconning Magic Railroad. And on top of the vulnerability, and the episodes where we see that she can be bossy and proud, we do get other episodes where we do also get to see the more caring side, and a side where she learns that she can't judge people before truly getting to know them. Honestly, the reason why the Hit Era version of Emily is my favorite is because I feel this is the era that did the most with her. The only flaw with Emily in this era, to me, is the writing of the episode she's in. But then again, that's a flaw with almost every episode in the Hit era. But honestly, I like Hit's portrayal of Emily. Oh, and while I'm being controversial, I might as well get this out the way. I actually prefer Robert Hartshorn's version of Emily's theme more than I do Mike and Jr.'s. So yeah, with the exceptions of a few bad episodes and lousy writing overall, I think Hit did a good job showing off the many different sides of Emily, which is more than I could say when the show switched to CGI. Yeah, I don't think any of the CGI eras knew what to do with her. In the first CGI era, the Nitrogen era, Emily is an NPC that just so happens to stay at Tidmouth Sheds with our main characters. I genuinely cannot remember anything she did throughout this era that wasn't in her mandatory spotlight episodes. So since there's nothing to say here, let's move on to the Brenner era. How Emily is in the Brenner era is kind of interesting. For one, they once again changed her personality to her being more nicer, which a lot of fans said that fixed Emily. Yeah, she's totally unique now that she's an overly nice character, just like the rest of them. Also, side note, I do find it weird how fans will look at Thomas, Henry, Gordon, James, and Percy being assholes and be like, yeah, that's how they're supposed to be. Yet when Emily's all bossy, they'll say that completely ruined her character and she's insufferable because of it. Yeah, the character she presented in the 2.5 episodes worth of screen time she had in the season prior. That definitely completely destroyed her character, because she's all bossy when compared to Gordon acting all bossy. I don't want to make any assumptions, but I will raise my non-existent eyebrow. But on top of her becoming nicer, Emily became more doubtful of herself. You usually see her throughout the Brenner seasons getting the short end of the stick. And to explain what I mean by this, I have to explain Duck. Duck is another character from the classic series who was from the Railway series, unlike Emily. Duck is a beloved fan favorite character, and for good reasons. But when Hit Entertainment bought the rights to Thomas and decided to streamline the main cast to be of a main group of 8, Duck was originally considered to be the 8th main character, which makes sense, he is Engine 8. However, Hit decided that they wanted a main female character, so they used their only female steam engine, the newcomer at the time, Emily, as the 8th main character. This led fans to believe that Emily just replaced Duck, even though Duck really hadn't had that big of a presence as a main character in the show since season 3, but that's besides the point. And also there is definitely a story I need to know of how Hit went from considering to make Duck the 8th main character to not even putting his model on set for the next 4 seasons, but that's neither here nor there. The real thing is that in the Brenner seasons, it's kind of an in-joke of how frequently Duck is used when compared to Emily. I find this is at its peak in the episode Duck and the Slip Coaches, where twice in this episode, Emily is unable to sleep in Tidmouth Sheds because Duck is in her spot. As much as I do find the joke to be funny, I also do kind of find it though to be a bit too on the nose and even kind of cruel towards Emily for no real reason. On top of that, as I said, Emily's personality throughout this era was just nothing but her being more doubtful about herself. Though there are 2 episodes I really liked from Emily in this entire era, one being the best engine ever, where she shows her capable side and ends up saving Caitlin before she goes too fast and ends up derailing, and my favorite CGI Emily episode, Dowager Hat's Busy Day, where we finally get to see a bit more of that Emily knows best side of her as she ends up helping Dowager Hat run the railway while Sir Topham Hatt is sick. Which basically means this episode's just a better version of the Green Controller, there I said it. But other than that, Dowager Hat's Busy Day is really the only episode where Emily truly felt like Emily. As even in the best engine ever, Emily still has a bunch of unnecessary and mischaracterized self-doubt. But it's still at least something they did with her. In Bwubba, as I already said, they did almost nothing with Emily. Bwubba just kinda forgot Emily was there, and anytime they used her, it was mainly because she's the girl engine. She can interact with the other girl engines, except we won't have that happen often. They basically never did anything with Emily during this era. There's an episode where she's upset that she doesn't feel like she has a best friend, and that's about it. However, I'm lying. There is one thing they do with Emily in the Bwubba era, that I actually rather like. In the otherwise dull and boring episode, Emily to the Rescue, Emily ends up proving herself by saving the Express from a collapsing bridge. She does such a good job responding to this call that Sir Topham Hatt makes her the official rescue engine who will retrieve Rocky the Breakdown Train whenever there's an emergency. But on top of that, the biggest honor she gets is finally being given her number 12. I think most fans, even ones who didn't really like her that much, all kind of just accepted that Emily would be number 12, fitting in right after Oliver, and I think we all can find it shocking that her getting her number wasn't something Hit did. Better late than never, I always say. But besides that, I really love Emily having the number 12. It's that one little thing that she needed to really make her feel like one of the main engines on Sir Topham Hatt's railway. And ironically, that's where Emily's story ends because the show was cancelled after that season. But honestly, when it comes to Emily, I think that's a pretty nice note to end her arc on. Or arcs on.
Number 12, safety engine, to the rescue!
Final thoughts. It's strange to think that Emily, who has basically been at the forefront of the series for 18 seasons, is also one of the most inconsistent and underappreciated characters of the entire main cast. I feel like she just can't catch a break. She was introduced at the tail end of the classic series, and even though I liked her there, she did just feel like a female Edward. I love the idea of her portrayal in the Hit era, but the writing didn't do her any favors, and fans seem to just hate her like that anyway, so it's all null and void. The Nitrogen era did nothing with her. The Renaissance didn't really like her that much, and instead decided to give her more self-doubt while only sometimes showing her Emily Knows Best side, and Bwubba just forgot she existed until the very end. Emily just can't win, can she? But despite all that, I actually still like Emily. 4 of her 5 incarnations all did something that I do in fact like. I do like her carrying big sister role throughout the classic series. I do like the idea of Emily being more bossy and egotistical during the Hit era. In fact, it does have some of my favorite Emily episodes. The Renaissance did give her fun episodes with Caitlyn and Dowager Hat of all characters, and I actually love that Bwubba finally gave her her number long after she proved herself deserving of one. Emily may be far from my favorite character, or even my favorite main character, but I still feel like she has earned her role as a main character. It doesn't matter if fans don't like her or if the writers don't like her, I still like her. Because to me, honestly, I also just like the fact that she does make the show more inclusive, more than these two nothing burgers of characters could ever hope to dream. So even if Emily doesn't think she's special, I think she's special.
And I'm lucky to have a friend like you too.
And that's the character skeleton of Emily the Stirling Engine.
There's no one quite like Emily. Friendly Emerald Emily. You don't need to ask her twice when you want some sound advice. All those who know Emily know what shows is special. She's got that certain realize. There's no one quite like Emily.
Hey, you're still here. Well, since you stuck around for this long, you might as well check out my last video. Or you can go into this playlist and look at other videos I made like this one. And if you just want to see more from this funny bonehead in general, why don't you like this video and subscribe to the channel? Comment if you're feeling really daring. And at the same time, feel free to follow me on Twitter and Instagram. Links to those in the description below. But anyways, thanks for watching, and if you need me, I'm going back to bed.